Hi, everyone. Is Israel's attack on Gaza appropriate? I think most people in the Western world who are not openly anti Semitic agree that the atrocities of 7th of October by Hamas against Israel were unacceptable by any moral standard. The trickier question is what would be an appropriate response to it by Israel? Does Hamas really need to be destroyed, or aren't there any milder or diplomatic solutions? And how do you destroy an organization that not only hides among civilians, but also enjoys broad support in Gaza? And how many civilian deaths are acceptable? As you probably know, these are the hotly debated questions right now. And unlike the question whether the Hamas attack was okay or not, on this one there is no consensus. A UN resolution of the General Assembly and several governments ask Israel for a ceasefire, and Israel rejects this except for small windows of humanitarian aid. So I want to help to break down the problem a bit. It may not surprise you that my message will be in defense of Israel, but I want to add value to that opinion with actual facts and arguments, which I don't see enough of. So, what is the task here? Imagine you're the president of Israel, and your job is to ensure that your residents are safe from future attacks from Hamas. You also want to rescue more than 200 hostages. At the same time, you need to ensure that you spare as many civilian lives as possible and more generally adhere to international war law. You also need to prevent a regional escalation of the conflict, which might result in attacks by the many pro-Palestinian or anti-Israel countries. And lastly, you want to retain good relations with your allies, who you will need to protect you in future because you're too small to protect yourself. So how would you do that? You can try to negotiate with Hamas and hoping they will be more peaceful in future. But why would this succeed? If Hamas has the stated objective to eradicate Israel and kill all Jews, a two-state solution has always been rejected by Hamas and will be rejected again. It is not what Hamas wants. And by the way, it's also not what Palestinians want either. According to a poll from this year, only 24% of Palestinians support a two-state solution. So what could you possibly give Hamas to convince them to stop attacking you in future? Very practically speaking. So the only other option is a violent intervention to destroy Hamas, and this is where it gets difficult. First of all, how do you avoid civilian deaths if Hamas military bases are in residential areas or hospitals? You offer civilians a way out by telling them to leave to a safe location, for example. Israel did that via social media, SMS, and leaflets. But only some of the people actually leave because Hamas attacks civilians on their way out. So what do? You position some of your armed forces along the escape routes to protect the civilians who are leaving. But still, half of the population in the war zone still chooses to stay. Why? One thing I heard a lot is the argument that Gaza is too densely populated, and I never really understood what this means, to be honest. So I had a look at different population densities to better understand what the problem is. And I found that the population density of Gaza City is half of Manhattan, and the population density of Gaza as a whole is less than New York City, just so you can imagine. So what the population density argument is saying is that someone in North New York City would not be able to move to the south with 3 weeks' notice because the area is too densely populated. What does that mean? The streets are too full to even move around? There's no place for shelter? Sorry if I'm missing something here. If I was in the situation, I'm pretty sure this would not stop me from fleeing. So I believe the more likely reason for people staying is an understandable lack of trust that Israel will be willing or able to stop Hamas from attacking me, or support of the Hamas resistance against Israeli forces. Whatever the reasons, again, putting yourself in the shoes of the Israeli president. Imagine you have tried all you could to protect civilians, yet a large number of them stay in the war zone. So what do? Will you stop attacking your military targets because those civilians would die? You may be easily tempted to say yes, but would you really? If the safety of your country is on the line and you have done all you could to protect Gazan civilians? So let's assume you decide to go ahead with the attacks and accept those civilians dying who did not leave. Then the UN and several governments ask for a ceasefire. You know that a ceasefire risks Hamas gaining strength, further lengthening the conflict and with it the number of deaths on both sides. At the same time, you see that it may help your second goal to rescue the Israeli hostages. And you see the need for humanitarian support for Gazan civilians as well. You also acknowledge the reality that the UN is a powerful organization, and totally ignoring the ask may risk your international alliances. So what do? You offer a ceasefire against the release of Israeli hostages, for example. And you say that you may consider short ceasefires to allow humanitarian support. Nobody immediately agrees and negotiations start. Meanwhile, you continue attacking. As the number of civilian deaths rise, so does the international pressure on you for a ceasefire. And you may question your own moral standards as well. So you ask yourself, is there an upper limit of civilian deaths I should be respecting that I'm willing to accept? Is 100 okay, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000? Or just as many as were killed in my country? My view on this is that the number of victims is generally not a good moral standard at all because it enforces a revenge logic where the goal of the war is a vendetta rather than long-term peace. And it allows a shift of responsibility and emotional blackmailing. If Israel has done all it could to avoid civilian deaths, and the reason for those deaths is that civilians were hindered to leave by Hamas or even stayed voluntarily, and Arab neighbors are refusing to accept refugees, why is Israel expected to feel more responsible for Gazan civilians? And to make things more complicated, how do I even check how many civilians have actually died if the source for that information is Hamas itself and international organizations with an agenda to enforce a ceasefire? The reason I walked you through this is to encourage a thinking from the perspective of a decision maker. If you're one of the many people who ask for a permanent ceasefire, I encourage you to think for yourself, realistically, what would you do if you had the job of President of Israel? Some of you will say, well, if it was the way presented here, I tend to agree that there are no real other options, but in reality, things are different, and this is all too simplistic. And the two main points that I hear made a lot are, one, that Israel is actually not attacking military structures, but targeting civilians on purpose. Or two, that Israel is so powerful that I did not even have to attack Gaza in the first place, since its country is not seriously in danger and it could have known how many civilians would die in the process. So I want to break down these counter-arguments as well. Argument one, Israel is targeting civilians on purpose. The high number of claimed civilian deaths of around 10,000 people seems to imply that these are not just collateral damage. Let's leave aside the question whether this number is actually reliable and assume that it's correct. So, has Israel hit non-military targets? Amnesty International and the UN say that it has checked some of the strikes and could not verify military operations for all of them. I'm wondering though how they would arrive at this assessment without having seen military intel. I mean, if I was a terrorist organization, I would not volunteer my military infrastructure and strategies. I checked their websites and the only sources they gave is interviews with residents and analysis of satellite photos. At the same time, US military experts say that Israel's targeting is legitimate. So this makes me doubt this claim. But of course, I'm not a military expert in this area. I mean, I'm generally not a military expert, and theoretically speaking, in the absence of any concrete military documentation proving details on the targeting, there is a possibility that the IDF did target civilians and the US military is not reliable because it supports Israel. So how do we resolve this? And my suggestion is to turn it around. Let's suppose Israel was hitting non-military targets. Let's further suppose that if it was the case, then it wouldn't be lack of competence, since the IDF has a global reputation of being maybe the most developed armed force. So let's suppose Israel targets civilians on purpose, maybe out of revenge, or maybe because they want to actually commit the genocide that some people accuse Israel of. Why would they do it? I'm this tiny country surrounded by mostly unfriendly states and hated by millions of people around the world, many of whom claim that I'm committing genocide against Palestinians and have tried very hard for a long time to find proof for that allegation. So killing civilians and indeed committing that genocide I've been accused of, wouldn't that be foolish? You could argue that yes, indeed, this would not be rational, but Israelis may be so full of anger that they cannot control their urge for revenge anymore. But have you seen any signs of uncontrolled impulses in this war? Israel, I think, took 2 days to carry out the first airstrike and several weeks to attack on the ground. Does that look like an impulsive, uncontrolled reaction to you? Argument 2 goes something like this. Israel does not need to invade Gaza because it is the more powerful player. It is not seriously in danger and it would just be an unfair battle. First of all, is the question how fair Israel's counteroffensive is even a meaningful one? What counts, in my view, is existing war laws and who started the war. By which standard would the first attacker get a moral privilege because he's weaker? The logic behind this is that, like in a sport, the two opponents should be equal to make it a fair struggle. Therefore, since Israel is militarily stronger, the battle is not fair and should be stopped. But we're not dealing with a sports competition. We're dealing with a unilateral declaration of war by the military weaker side. Do stronger people not have a right to self-defense? And wouldn't their self-defense tend to be even fairer because they're more skilled? Just think of an unskilled man attacking a martial artist. Wouldn't the martial artist have the right to self-defend? And wouldn't this counterstrike likely even be more targeted and measured versus just brutal? Also, I would like to remind of some facts to reassess this idea of Gaza as the weak opponent and Israel being strong. I think the framing of this conflict should not just focus on Israel's and Gaza's military power, but their global allies and where they stand in the world. And Gaza has allies with significant power in terms of the military power and societal impact. Here are some facts and figures just to show you what I mean. Fact number 1. There are 2 billion Muslims and 50 Muslim-majority countries worldwide. Based on research done in 14 of these countries, more than 70% say that the Palestinian cause is their cause as well. By comparison, there are only 15 million Jews and only one Jewish country with 7 million people. Fact 2. 55 out of 143 countries in the UN General Assembly have not condemned the Hamas attack. Fact 3. On a yearly basis, over 1,000 rockets are fired from Gaza to Israel. Fact number 4. In 2022, the UN General Assembly passed 15 resolutions against Israel and 13 against the rest of the world, including Hamas and countries such as North Korea. Fact 5. Since the 7th of October attack on Israel, there have been 80 million pro-Israel hashtags in social media, but over 200 million pro-Palestine hashtags. So by what standard would you say that Israel can consider itself powerful and safe enough to not take Hamas out? So for those of you who are jumping to condemn Israel for its counterattack on Gaza, please think again. Don't be intellectually lazy, check the facts and ask yourself, what would you do if you were the president of Israel in very practical terms? And also zoom out of Israel. If you ask Israel to stop attacking and just put down its weapons, what standard are you setting for the rest of the world? That anyone can slaughter as many civilians as they want and then say, if you attack us back, we will kill our own people as well and it will be your fault? Just think again.